Management Research.
Hello and welcome to the Management Research podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Eugene. Hello and welcome to the next episode in my mini-series dedicated to strategic management. And in our today's episode, we continue talking about the 5 forces framework. And in particular, we talk about the rivalry among competitors. As you know, in each of my podcasts over the last weeks, I'm trying to show what are the drivers that may increase these threats or may decrease the threats of entry or the threats of substitutes, or now we talk about the rivalry among competitors. Today we're going to talk about the next 2 threats, and namely these are the economies of scale and the ratio of fixed to variable costs. If we talk about the economies of scale, I have a very good example for you. So first of all, let's define the economies of scale. It is a situation when the production of each additional unit of your product costs less than the production of the previous one. If you imagine you have a big factory and you're producing the cars, producing the first car is very expensive just because you need the whole factory, but as soon as you have the whole factory, producing each additional unit is not so expensive. And for big car producers, it's not a big problem producing, let's say, 200 or 400 cars more a month than usually. Another good example is the stadium. Imagine that a city builds a stadium that is meant for 10,000 people. And now the cost that you need in order to build a stadium, they are very big. But at the end, you can sell the seats in this stadium to almost any price, because anything that will bring you money is good. And it doesn't really matter what kind of concert or what kind of game is going to happen there. It can be a game for 300 people, 400 people, 500 people. It doesn't really matter, because the fixed cost, the costs of building the stadium, they were big, but now the variable costs, this additional costs for each additional seat, are very low. Imagine that you have built this stadium, and now you have a big star, a rock star coming into a city, and the star is going to make a show. And the question is, what would be the price that you will sell the tickets to? And of course, first you set a high price in order to try to sell as many tickets to a high price as possible. And then after the tickets are sold, you still have capacity. Let's assume you have sold 5,000 tickets for 100 euros. And now you have 5,000 of empty seats that you can also sell. And it doesn't really matter what is the price. You can go even lower and you can start selling tickets, let's say, that are located further from the floor, and you sell them for 80 euros. And you sold, let's say, another 2,000 tickets. Again, you have 3,000 seats empty. And you can go even lower in the price. And theoretically, you can go to any price, and even if you sell the tickets for 1 euro, it will be better than nothing. So as soon as you covered the costs that you needed to invite this superstar, this rock star who is going to sing on your stadium, the rest of the tickets can be sold to almost any price. And this explains what is the effect of scale economies on the rivalry among competitors. Now imagine that we have a different location in the same city, and they also invited a kind of rock star. And they always also want to sell their tickets. The question of the final price and the question of the competition, because if it is the same evening, where will people go to, will be defined by the price. And the lowest price will be at the stadium, where the number of seats is the highest, just because you can go in a price as low as possible, just not to allow the empty seats being there. In this event, the prices of those who have a higher economies of scale will go as low as possible. The same happens in the car industry. If you have a producer who has a big production line that is able to produce more cars than is necessary, let's say now for the market, they can start producing even more and going lower in the price, just because the cost for each additional car produced will be lower than the cost of producing one car from scratch. That is why we see a huge competition between the producers, especially those who have big production lines and factories, because they try to go in price as low as possible. As you see, the question of economies of scale is partly the question of the ratio of fixed to variable costs, because the fixed costs can be huge. If you want to build a stadium, imagine how much will it cost. If you want to build a production line, a factory, or a production line that will produce cars, you can imagine how expensive it will be. But as soon as you have done it, the rest will be the variable costs, the costs of the employees working there, the cost of raw materials, and maybe the power supply and so on. And in this event, the price of the final product should just cover these variable costs with a little bit smallest margin. And this is why the rivalry among competitors is heated up by the economies of scale and by the ratio of fixed to variable costs. There are many examples where you can see what happens when the ratio of fixed to variable costs is different, and we talked about the buildings like a factory or the buildings like a stadium, but think about the airline industry. Buying a one plane, let's say an Airbus, is very expensive, but as soon as you have done it, the costs of really running it are not so high. And that is why many of the airlines which have the excess capacity, this is something we talked about in the previous episode, they almost invariably try to reduce the prices to their tickets, and it leads to price wars and industry-wide losses. Because at the end, in order to survive, you go to lowest prices, and this leads to even more competition, and your competitors also have to go to lower prices, and in the end we have the huge competitive battles. This may be good for the consumer, because at the end the prices are lower, but in the long term it can harm the whole industry, just because if the prices are so low, then many of the incumbents will try to leave the market or will even become bankrupt. Why do we discuss these two drivers, the economies of scales and the ratio of fixed to variable costs, in this podcast? Because they have impact on the rivalry among competitors and how easy it will be for your firm to sell something in this market. If the economies of scale are on the other side, if your competitors enjoy the economies of scale, then for you being in the market will be a very hard task. And vice versa, if you are the one who has the economies of scale, who enjoys excess capacity, then in your event you can of course go lower in the prices and beat your competitors off the market. I hope it was interesting. I hope that you learned a lot about the rivalry among competitors. And in the next episode, we're going to switch to the next force in the 5 forces framework by Porter. Wish you all the best. Don't forget to leave your comment, give me a like, subscribe. It's not because of the monetization. This podcast doesn't bring me any money, just to know that you are listening, to know that you are interested. All the best. And bye-bye.